Awesome. Okay, we've got hello, Kathy. Hi, Patty. Hi, Sharon. Welcome. It's nice to see you, even virtually. Hi, Bonnie. Hi, Christine. Hello, Jennifer. Hi, Lisa. Nice to see you guys on here. Hi, Steph. I just got your email. Hi, Emily. Hi, Lisa. Nice to see that you're back again. I hope things have been going well. We're going to get started, everyone, in a minute or two, or wait for a few more people to join on. As you're settling in, hopefully with a hot cup of coffee or tea, please know that this session is being recorded, and please introduce yourself in the chat box. And don't forget that there's a Q&A function here. We'd like you to ask your questions in there. It'll be easier for us to find them at the end during the Q&A. And if you have any difficulties, please feel free to email myself or Nikisha or chat with us directly, and we'll help figure it out during the presentation. Hi, Denise. Nice to see you again. I hope things are going well out your way. Yes, Katie with a hot coffee. I need that. My feet are freezing. I'm sitting in the basement, so I will be getting extra socks afterwards and more coffee. Hi, Nancy. How are things going out your way in Saugeen? We're expecting quite a number of folks to drop in on this session today, and I see there's about 25 of us online right now, so we'll give it another minute or two before we get things started. Hello, Christine. Nice to meet you. Hi, Paula. Welcome. Oh, hi, Peggy. How are things going? Welcome. It's nice to see you here. I hope your latest camping adventures have been keeping you refreshed in this fall season. Hi, Nicole. Nice to meet you. I don't know if we've ever met before, so welcome. I'm Karen, And I'll turn on my camera in just a moment as folks are joining in. Thanks for introducing yourselves and letting us know where you're from in the chat box. And there is a Q&A function on Zoom. If you're familiar with it, you should be able to scroll over and ask questions throughout the webinar. And if you have any questions, feel free to direct them to Nikisha or myself. We're both going to be helping take care of you during this webinar today. Okay, well, we're just after 3:30 here, so why don't we get started? I'm going to turn my camera back on and say, hello, everyone. Nice to see you, or vice versa, perhaps. Nice to see me again, I hope. If you haven't met me before, my name's Karen, and I work at Credit Valley Conservation, and I'm part of the the Watershed Interpreters Network group, and I'll be your moderator for today. So as you're joining us, continue to interact through the chat throughout the presentation, and I have a few more announcements to make before we get started. Okay, so as I mentioned, I work at CVC. Our office is based in Mississauga, Ontario, but I'm actually here living in Guelph, Ontario. And as we work towards reconciliation with Indigenous people, we begin our webinar today by respectfully acknowledging that we are situated on traditional territories and treaties lands, in particular those of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. We are on the lands also of the Anishinaabe of the Williams First Treaty First Nations, the Huron-Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and the Métis Nation. And as shared stewards of Ontario's land and water resources, along with these First Nation communities, Conservation Ontario and the conservation authorities that many of us represent appreciate and respect the history and diversity of the land and its people, and are grateful to have the opportunity to meet today in this territory this afternoon. So today is our second webinar, second WIN webinar, in a series of online PD opportunities that we've been planning for you this year. And as I mentioned, WIN, or Watershed Interpreters Network, is a group of educators and interpreters working at CAs in Ontario. And if you work at a CA, you're already part of this free network. And if you're joining us from another organization or group, welcome. We're glad to see you here. Um, some of you might know there's a group of us that plan and engage each other annually each year at a conference called Rekindle the Sparks Educators Workshop, and it's usually held every November. We have a series of sessions planned for November, so stay tuned at the end of this webinar. I'll share more about that. And if you're new this year and you have access to social media like Facebook, we've got a new group open up for group discussion and just sharing resources and to continue our network and our connection post today's webinar. So if you haven't joined, or if you're from another organization but would like to join, feel free, look us up and connect. So again, if there's a few more people joining us now, don't forget there's a Q&A to ask any questions throughout the session today, and we'll try to answer that at the end of Claire's presentation today. And if you have any questions for us, feel free to direct message myself or Nikisha here in the chat. I'm going to pull up my chat so I can see what's going on here too. Today is Take Me Outside Day, and many of us usually work with people outside, but today we are online and not outside. So I'm wondering if we could start with a quick poll to see where everyone lands on where it comes when it comes to teaching about climate change. So let's launch poll number 1. I can see the numbers coming in live, which is quite neat to see them fluctuate. The first few people that answered were showing that it was 100%. answering to the questions in yes category. So now it's changed a little bit. Give you maybe 10 more seconds to answer the poll. If you can't find it, just sort of scroll over your screen and it should pop up if it's disappeared at the bottom of your screen. All right. And the polls are in. So it sounds like the majority of those on the call today have taught about climate change. And many of you have used the carbon or eco footprint activity in order to teach about climate change. When it comes to teaching about what's happening in real life beyond science, it's about a 50-50 split there. And most people are saying that they are teaching about social impacts associated with climate change beyond the impacts to the environment and nature. They're going to be teaching about impacts to human life and um, the economy and beyond. So very interesting. I think Claire's going to make some connections for us today. I'm going to close this down. And I'm going to pass things on to Chris Ives. She's from Essex Region Conservation Authority, and she's going to introduce our presenter today, Claire Sanders. So I'll pop off and pass it back to you.
Thanks, Karen, and hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. As Karen said, I'm Chris Ives. I'm the Curator Education Coordinator with the Essex Region Conservation Authority, and it's my great pleasure to introduce my colleague and today's speaker, Claire Sanders. Claire is originally from Edmonton, where she obtained her Bachelor of Science at the University of Alberta. She moved to the Essex region in 2007, where she obtained both a master's degree in biology and a Bachelor of Education from the University of Windsor. Claire has been with the Essex Region Conservation Authority for over 6 years, first as the Remedial Action Plan Coordinator for the Detroit River Canadian Cleanup Organization, and now as the Climate Change Specialist. In these roles, she facilitates partnerships and work plan priorities for the many individuals and agencies needed to address regional ecological challenges, which are too complex to be addressed by a single organization alone. Claire lives in Kingsville with her husband and daughter, and I'll turn it over to her now. Thank you for joining us today, Claire.
Thank you so much, Chris. It's really a pleasure to be here. And of course, my Zoom is telling me that my internet connection is unstable. I've only had 4 no problem Zoom meetings today, but here, it's like, anyway, so we have backup plans in case things happen. But let me just share my screen here. And I think I'm actually going to turn off my camera as well, just to ensure that we've got good good connections. So again, my name's Claire Sanders. It's my pleasure to be here today and talking about these really huge cross-cutting, transnational, transboundary, multidisciplinary, and really multi-generational issues around climate change. My position at the authority is fairly new. I've been in it for almost 2 years now, and it's maybe a bit of an unusual position for a conservation authority. But we don't have a regional government here, and we saw really a lack of coordination around climate adaptation. And when we started digging a bit deeper into it, we saw that there was actually, in fact, also a lack of coordination and support for our smaller municipalities, not just in adaptation, but also in mitigation as well, and how we're reducing greenhouse gases across the region. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about what, we started this thing called the Climate Change Collaborative in the region, where we're bringing together all of our municipal partners and all of our experts within the health unit, within the agricultural community, and all of our land managers to discuss sort of regional issues. And then out of that came, like I said, this gap within the energy side of things. So I've been spending a lot of my time over the last year facilitating an energy plan. So again, it's a little bit maybe outside of what a normal conservation authority is working on, but it is certainly adding, I think, a lot to the region and a lot of support to our smaller municipalities. So, I don't think I need to talk too much about the rationale for climate action with this group. Scientific evidence for warming of the climate system is unequivocal. Evidence found in ice cores, glaciers, tree rings, sedimentary rocks show that the Earth's climate responds to changes in greenhouse gas levels. And the evidence reveals that current warming is occurring roughly 10 times faster than the average rate of ice age recovery warming. Amazingly, we've in fact known about this for a really long time, since the 1850s. And I really like this little clip. This is from a sort of a popular mechanics magazine back from 1912, I think Australian. And it says the furnaces of the world are now burning about 2 billion tons of coal a year. When this is burned, uniting with oxygen, it adds about 7 billion tons of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere yearly. This tends to make the air a more effective blanket for the Earth and to raise its temperature. The effect may be considerable in a few centuries. So that was almost 100 years ago. And of course, we're seeing the effect a lot sooner than that. And that's because of the technological revolution, post-war revolution, where we really, after the Second World War. So the evidence really for climate change is compelling. And we've all heard about global temperatures and warming oceans and melting ice caps and sea level rise and polar bears. But what are we really seeing locally? There's a lot of really incredible resources out there now that aren't just for scientists or climatologists. You can go onto a website called climateatlas.ca and explore it for yourself and explore your own region. And I encourage you to do so if you haven't. Here I've navigated to the Essex region, and you can scroll through. So each of the, there's variables at the top where you can look at very hot days. So those are days over 30. And then, but there's options to look at cold weather, temperature, precipitation, growing season. And then you have the option to look at your scenario. So I'm looking at a high carbon scenario, which is the path that we're on, high carbon, because we haven't been able to reduce our emissions enough yet. And then you see here that we're going to increase days over 30, will increase by 50. So, I think that is pretty telling. By 2080 or so, we're going to be looking at a lot of really hot days. It's going to be warmer. There's going to be more extreme temperatures, heat waves, droughts, fewer colder days. Minimum, mean, and maximum temperatures are projected to be significantly increased each season. So just to build on that a little bit, in the region, we're looking at sort of three main impacts, and we talk about this across Ontario, but warmer, wetter, wilder. And those three impacts will give rise to an uncountable number of indirect or secondary impacts. So things like increased rainfall in the spring and winter instead of snow, and the rain is falling with greater intensity over shorter periods of time, which has caused millions of insured and uninsured losses over the last decade, especially in Windsor and many of our municipalities here. And we're seeing more intense storms and increased shoreline erosion from lack of ice cover and high water levels. Because there's a lot of conservation authorities on this call right now. We've really certainly seen the impact with our flood status here. Last year, we saw over 200 days under some kind of flood watch, and we saw 15 separate flooding events in 2019. I haven't had the courage to look at what 2020 has held, but it will be higher than that because we've been on an extended flood watch again this year. So, there are points where the static lake level was so high that it exceeded our thresholds for monitoring and predicting effects associated with wind speed and direction and duration. So those direct impacts will give rise to enormous numbers of indirect impacts. Everything from aquatic species to impacting aquatic species and increasing nuisance algae, blue-green algae. There will be impacts to coastal wetlands from changing lake levels. We're likely to see new invasive species, plants and animals and trees may be impacted or could be completely displaced. And in the Essex region, it's really it's added stress to an already very stressed system. In terms of human health, up until 2018, black-legged ticks or deer ticks were only found in the Point Pelee area. In 2019, the health unit had to update their Lyme disease risk map to include the majority of Essex County, as they're now finding black-legged ticks across the region. So, we're seeing health impacts, and not only has climate change been identified as a threat to physical health, but more psychologists are warning that the mental health impacts and the economic toll it is real and is likely to spread. In terms of agriculture, 2019 was an extremely difficult year for our farmers because of a very rainy spring, and most didn't get anything in the ground until mid-June. And when they did get something in the ground, it was soybeans. And we know planting soybeans year after year isn't good for soil health. Our own tree planting program suffered immensely as well, as we weren't able to prepare fields for a restoration project, and we had to destroy over 20,000 saplings that weren't able to go in the ground. And of course, municipal infrastructure is being impacted. So from sewers to road buckling, we're certainly seeing the impact. Our high water levels and extreme rainfall is wreaking havoc on our gravity outlets. And especially in many of our municipalities, their stormwaters are full of lake water. And so they're already at full capacity before these big rain events that we're having. So what does that mean? And especially when we're talking to students, I think it's important to make some, more personal connections around what this really means and how will this impact the things in our lives that have always been there. And things that might matter to students that are not necessarily interested in nature ecosystems or that kind of thing, but they may be worried that they can no longer play hockey at outdoor ice rinks, or they weren't able to play soccer last year because the field was flooded in the spring and then it was way too hot in the summer. There's going to be future impacts to recreation and tourism, outdoor events, things like bird watching, water sports, boating, and fishing in our region, and maybe not for the students, but local wine could be impacted. That's a big deal for me. And then, we have a lot of farming families in this region, and farmers are already under a lot of stress and pressure. And, I think we'll begin to see potentially disappearing and shifting family farms. Or simple things like it was too hot to walk your dog, or too many ticks to walk your dog anymore. What else matters to your community, and how do people see their own community changing? I think it's important to make some of those connections sort of at the personal level. And that's why I talk a little bit about what climate change means to me. And this is a picture of my daughter at daycare. And, I have all these existential crises about, what the future is going to be like for her, certainly. But, at a more sort of practical level, I look at her on the asphalt on the playground, and there's no shade there. And she was kept inside numerous days this summer and last summer because of heat. And, that I don't like that. And so, it's other things like, how is she going to be able to play sports outside? Is she going to be able to visit the beach in the summer? Am I going to want her swimming in the lake? How livable is it going to be here when she grows up? And is she going to want to stay here when she grows up? And is it going to continue to be the place for life for her? And, as a side note, I think as environmental educators, I think everyone is well aware of the challenges around teaching outside. But I think it's worth thinking about your own education spaces and begin to advocate for climate adaptation measures within your own programs. And whether that's things like shade structures or water bottle filling stations or emergency plans in case of extreme weather. I think there's an opportunity for all of us to think about adapting our own programs to the changing climate. So you obviously can't have a presentation about youth climate action without talking about these two young people. And these two who have done so much in their young lives that it really makes me wonder every day what I'm doing with my own life. So, of course, Greta Thunberg first learned about the climate crisis or climate change around the age of 10 or 11. And after falling into a deep depression, the only thing that helped her was action. So in 2018, she began skipping school. And then that's where the Fridays for Future movement really started. This September, Thunberg and 14 other young people have been suing countries around the world for failing to take sufficient action against climate change. And then, of course, this is our Canadian Indigenous water activist, Autumn Pelletier. She addressed hundreds of international guests at UN headquarters, and she's urges Canada and the world really to respect the sacredness and importance of clean water. So, we're seeing this level of engagement from youth, and it's become more and more apparent over the last couple of years. They're getting involved in larger movements like climate strikes, litigation, and political and policy engagement at the federal and provincial level. So why are we seeing this level of engagement now, and why is it important to engage them in the decisions we're making for their future? Well, they are most certainly suffering the impacts, and this is our region. This is a shoreline community, Leamington, last spring, as well as a flooded farmer's field there. And then the top picture is a blue-green algae bloom, which we're seeing increasingly in our summers here. So they're certainly seeing the impacts themselves. This image is heartbreaking. This is a picture that a Leamington High School student took of his own house, his own living room, last spring. So, I certainly know that I deal with sort of things like ecological grief and eco-anxiety. I can't even imagine, what these students are feeling at this point and their anxiety about the situation. So, one of the things that we're being told from the health professionals is that action reduces anxiety. So we need to figure out how best to engage our youth. So not only because there's value there, but also it helps them and helps their mental health as well. And they'll also be responsible for implementing the solutions. So this is some recent data from our energy plan, and this is business as usual greenhouse gas emissions. So along the bottom is the year projected to 2050 if we don't do anything, if we don't reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. You can see that Ontario goal for 2030 and a federal goal for 2050. We have a long way to go, and that's just our region. People across the province are working towards these major targets. And so, it's not something that we're going to be able to do in this generation. So they will be responsible for implementing these solutions. And obviously, they are already leading the way. So, we've seen this. We know they have different perspectives. They see things differently. And they may not know how to operationalize, but they have creative solutions, and they're an untapped resource. They're also able to make national and global connections that I'm not able to make. So This is from, we have a very strong eco team out in Leamington, and this is some of the work that they have undertaken by tweeting some of these images out to federal ministers and to our prime minister before the COP21, which I think was amazing. And they're creative and good with social media, and they can be seen, they're visible. And this is great too. So they're being seen and they're getting retweets from federal ministers. I mean, this is, the way democracy is supposed to be. This is how we drive change. So I think it's incredible. It's inspiring for them to engage with people, I think, whose careers focus on climate change, and federal leaders as well. And so I take no credit for this one. This is a completely student-led climate action summit. Students in Leamington decided that they wanted to meet with their municipal leader to determine really how climate change is impacting their municipality and how their municipality is responding and how they can help. So last year they scheduled a really great climate action summit. We were invited to attend, which was great, and we were able to sit in on some of those sessions. It just came at a very important time for us in this region when we were declaring climate emergencies and committing to take climate action. So it was, they were able to get all of, like, a lot of municipal leaders in the room from various municipalities, more than I was able to get at one of my climate events 2 weeks prior. So they have the ability, I think, to make change, whether they know it or not. And this is just some more pictures from that event. But the meetings between schools and municipal leaders, charted out ways that they can help in the community, and facilitated and encouraged engagement with municipal leaders. And then there's ongoing climate engagement now with those municipal leaders. So they continue to hold follow-up meetings in many municipalities and attend council meetings and whatnot. And we know that, municipalities are a really important driver of change. They hold a lot of power to influence emissions, as well as adapt to climate change. So they're, helping to facilitate that municipal student engagement, I think, is really quite critical. So in terms of climate strikes, this was, of course, last spring in Toronto. Thousands of people flooded Queen's Park to demand that the province take climate action. I think there's something like 4 million people worldwide participated in these school strikes. In Windsor-Essex, we had hundreds of students and community members participate in these strikes at high schools and in downtown Windsor. So I think my point here is just that rural communities or even a community like Windsor can experience challenges in terms of gaining support and momentum for these kinds of initiatives, especially when there's one school in a community or something like that. So that's where we found that we could join those climate strikes and those school strikes. So some of us went to Windsor and others joined a climate strike. This is our water quality scientist, Katie, who joined a climate strike at Leamington High School. We were just there, we were just present. And I think it helps with the momentum and engagement. So some of the other ways that we are engaging is in terms of our energy task force. We have a youth member on our energy task force. And this has really been helpful because they, as we're trying to engage the public and gain input on things like greenhouse gas mitigation targets, we need to engage the public, and we need to engage youth and know what they think. So they're able to use things like TikTok, which, raise your hand if you have a TikTok account here. I don't. So, but it was a really successful sort of campaign. We got a lot of students to answer our survey, and so that's been really successful. Just having them as members of our task force. We feature them in our newsletter and things that are of interest to them, like going back to school shopping. We know that they have a lot to say and that their voices are, they've got strong voices. So we let them tell their stories. And then also through surveys and facilitated conversations. So, I'm not asked to speak with an eco team or asked to help our education team with a presentation. And, I've started sending out sort of a short survey beforehand to find out what they think about climate change. And so I'm actually going to take that opportunity to ask if we can put up the next poll. And this poll is a selection of questions that I might use to prompt conversations with our students. So can we have that next poll? We'll just give you sort of a minute or two to answer that. Maybe another 15 seconds. Okay, do we want to pull up the results? Great. So, I ask students how often they think about climate change, and a lot of think about it a lot. So, as do a lot of you, apparently. Many of them understand climate change probably better than most of our leaders do, our municipal leaders or municipal administration. A lot recognize that they have likely been affected by the impacts of climate change, similar to this group. And, I'm curious to know how they're influenced to take action on climate and where they learn their information from, because I think it's useful to have some of those broader conversations about sort of trustworthiness of social media and those kinds of things when it comes to climate information. So, usually it's less than a 10-minute survey, but I think it certainly opens up opportunities to have a lot of broad conversations. So some of the challenges that I've experienced around climate adaptation is obviously sustained engagement. They're busy and they've got a lot to do. A lot of them are very dedicated school students, and then they're moving through their years. They get busier in grades 11 and 12, which is really challenging. Working around their school schedule. Many are in school now, and with COVID, the virtual session is challenging. But usually meetings after 2:30 are good for students. And then, trying to figure out meaningful action that they can take outside their school, things that are other than tree planting, because tree planting comes up a lot and it is meaningful. It's very meaningful action. But, there are other ways that they can have influence at the policy level. And I think explaining and providing the tools for them to be effective is important. And maybe that's not for us, that information for us to give, but there are people in our communities who can make those connections, I think. And we've been successful providing some of that training to students as well, so that we can see change happen at the municipal level. So, yeah, I think in terms of climate change in the curriculum, I think there's changes starting to happen there. But, even a recent study by Lakehead University it revealed that Canadians are deeply concerned about climate change, yet only half feel they know enough about the issue. So, a third of teachers surveyed report teaching about climate change, but most students experience only 1 to 10 hours of instruction per year. So, that's a fairly recent study. So that's not a lot of information they're being provided. So I think one way that we as environmental educators and as conservation authority employees, most of us, is to be able to mainstream climate in the outdoor classroom. And mainstreaming is a term that's really used in the integration of climate change into adaptation and into government policy, and especially around sustainable development. So when climate change adaptation plans are made, they don't want that climate change adaptation plan to sit on a shelf. It needs to be integrated throughout policies in order for it to be implemented. So, I think there are a lot of opportunities to mainstream climate change within our own programs. And this is something that Chris and I are working on together, and we haven't necessarily accomplished yet, but is starting to roll around a lot in our head. And it's really simple, I think, with some programs like Life in the Forest, obviously an exploration of forest ecology. But there's plenty of opportunities here for discussing things like natural solutions to climate change, carbon sequestration, wetlands to mitigate flooding issues, and then the impact, of course, of changing climate to plants and animals. I think there's also significant opportunities to talk about climate change in heritage programs as well, especially around how things might be different 150 years ago and what the current impacts of a changing climate are. And so at the John R. Park Homestead, we have an ice house there, which is a great opportunity to talk about how the current lack of ice cover on Lake Erie, it would be very difficult to fill that ice house now, which would very much impact their way of life. And finally, I think there's a lot of opportunity to talk about things like energy conservation, carbon footprints, and even investment in renewable energy, and the value of energy to early settlers through these programs. And then some programs are a little bit more difficult, like maybe orienteering. But I'm sure, if you were delivering this program, you'd probably give a safety talk, and perhaps this is an area where you can talk about some of those changes in our environment, like ticks or mosquitoes or other health impacts. Wilderness survival and emergency preparedness for extreme weather events is also likely something that we could incorporate into this program as well. We've undertaken a few sector-partnered contextualized experiences and SHISMs where we can really engage students and bring them into an adaptation planning process. I always say that climate change planning isn't really rocket science. It's very much good planning, good ecological planning. So this year, or I guess last year, Chris and I took these students through a workshop that would be part of any climate adaptation strategy. So it's called a vulnerability assessment. And you identify impacts, so warmer, wetter, wilder impacts to Holiday Beach Conservation Area. And then you can identify those impacts, do a risk assessment, prioritize them, and brainstorm adaptation actions and organize them under whether it's policies or education and awareness. So, we can talk about everything from visitor impacts, right, or camping, how it impacts our infrastructure, but also about, plants and animals and how it impacts them. So then we can actually use this information for an actual adaptation strategy for that conservation area. We're beginning to better engage our volunteers a little bit with projects that will directly help us with our climate adaptation work. So we've started hosting some tree measuring workshops to give better understanding of tree growth and survival from our community tree plantings. And we're a small CA, so we don't have a lot of capacity there. you know, and this project, we also include a photo inventory of tree health issues to build a library of resources for citizen science. But as our adaptation work progresses and we're looking for things like sourcing seed outside of our region, planting different species, these projects and the increased capacity it will give us, I think will be very helpful. So there's certainly a lot of teachable moments regarding climate change with many of our existing citizen science programs. And then, of course, tree planting and wetlands building, you know, we can reframe it as working with students on climate change solutions, because that really is what it is. There are some neat external citizen science projects that really cross various boundaries. So the Zika virus is primarily transmitted to humans by the bite of an infected Aedes species mosquito, so either Aedes aegypti or Aedes albopictus. And in 2017, that mosquito was first found in the region. It wasn't carrying Zika, but they're typically found in tropical environments. So the range expansion for these mosquitoes is expanding. And I thought that this was a really neat project through GLOBE, which is actually NASA in the US. And it also really overlaps with our local health unit's Fight the Bite campaigns. So you train in a mosquito protocol, you identify Zika carrying mosquitoes, eliminate breeding sites, and prevent future outbreaks. So this is a really neat, I think, citizen science and hands-on project for conservation areas. And just a few resources that might be helpful. If you aren't as engaged with either mitigation planning or adaptation planning at your conservation authority, your municipal or regional sustainability departments, I'm sure, are. And I'm sure they would also have a section in their climate change adaptation strategy or plan around engagement. So I think connecting with those folks and figuring out what they need to communicate, it would be useful. Your local health unit has a mandate to undertake health climate change planning. Parks Canada, MNRF are all doing climate change planning at conservation areas. There's a resource there for Windsor Law Center for Cities. They have a series of recorded webinars around youth engagement on local climate action. And then finally, conservation authority offices. You know, there's likely somebody in your own office who is pulled into an adaptation planning process at some point, either at the regional or municipal level, because it's really hard to do adaptation planning without, at the watershed scale, without CA staff. Your youth leaders, you know, we often look to youth leaders through eco schools or environmental clubs, but there's also international baccalaureate students that have a mandate to be leaders in their shared guardianship of the planet. So if you've got an IB school or IB program, but also, you know, law centers and medical students. And I think there are a very broad group of very passionate young people that we can engage that are outside sort of our typical area. And again, just a shout out to our local, very engaged eco team. You know, this is a wordle of all of the campaigns they've undertaken, and it's just incredible. It's incredible the work that they can do with some external support. So just to wrap up and give us a few minutes for discussion, every time, you know, I talk with our consultants who are doing our energy plan, every time you look at like the greenhouse gas emissions, you know, it's overwhelming. It's, you know, we know where we need to go and it's hard to get there. But, you know, our energy consultant keeps saying there's opportunity, and climate change does present opportunity across the board. And certainly with education, there's an opportunity, I think, to use climate change as the driver for change. You know, we're seeing that already. And I think it presents opportunities to find innovative ways to assist our communities and starting with showing leadership and addressing their thirst for knowledge. And interestingly, that statement came out of the Ontario Emergency Management Review. It didn't even come from a climate change adaptation plan. There's people who are interested in learning more about climate change across the board and what the impacts are going to be. So, I think this certainly presents an opportunity for us to talk about it more. And finally, I think climate change presents opportunities to tell your own story about how it's impacted you and your feelings, about your current environment and the future environment. And in a very real way, I think this helps our students relate to us as educators. So that's all I have, and I'm happy to take any questions. I haven't been watching the chat, but I'd like to invite Chris Ives, our education coordinator, to join me for the Q&A, since she's really an integral part of doing this work and integrating what I'm doing at a regional level into our programming. So.
Wow, thank you very much, Claire, for your presentation and all of the resources that you shared with us. You've pointed us in some really clear, straight directions of what we can take in our own work worlds to move forward on. There are a couple of questions in the Q&A for you and Chris, so I'm going to pop those up now. And if folks have questions that they want to ask as the Q&A is going on, feel free to continue to add them there. Everybody else, if you've got the same question or you're curious about something along the same lines, you're more than welcome to upvote. There's a little thumbs up that you can add to. So we will answer Katie's question first. It says, you mentioned, Claire, youth voice in adaptation strategies. Have you ever seen students create their own adaptation mitigation plan for their school?
No, certainly they're undertaking pieces of adaptation or mitigation strategies, but not sort of necessarily a plan as a whole. Many of them, engage in things like wear a sweater day or whatever it is, or turn out the lights day. Like there are many internal campaigns within schools. They just do a way better job at doing it. Like, we need them to bring those outside those school walls and engage the rest of the community in those campaigns, because they're really good at them and they're really good at saving money for the school too. So in this region and our eco teams, they now get a portion of the money they save from whatever energy costs are saved from those campaigns. So I haven't seen sort of specific adaptation plans or strategies for schools, but certainly they're working on pieces of them, I would say.
Thank you. Thanks, Katie, for your question. Bonnie's asking, how open are your school boards for strikes and actions towards local governments? Are they supportive in that way?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think all school boards are a little bit different with that. I know, yeah, I think, I don't know. I'm not sure. Chris, do you have an answer for that? Have you seen?
I don't have a direct answer. What I would say is some schools locally are really well respected for being at the forefront, for having passionate, engaged students. As Claire mentioned in her presentation, for already being engaged at municipal levels and beyond. So I think boards recognize student action and impact. I think, the situation we're in currently, trying to get our students outside, everyone's goal is to foster connection, engagement, creating investment, passion, and action now and in the future. So if they feel poorly about it, I haven't heard them say that openly. And I think it's a hard flag to fly. What do you say when your students want to go outside and march or stop traffic or hold up a sign? We're trying to raise people who feel a civic responsibility, who are active in their community. As a conservation authority, we support that. The boards and environmental leads that we work with support that. And I think that movement is growing, and I find that quite encouraging. So I can't speak officially, of course, for any board in our region, but like I said, I think it's sort of hard to argue against.
Thanks, guys. Madeline is asking, does anyone know of helpful tools or resources related to climate change and climate change adaptation they would be willing to share? The audience is for high school students. I actually have a book myself. I'll see if I can grab it from my desk in a minute, from Green Teacher. There's one for elementary and one for high school. I'm sure you can adapt the lessons in there if you're looking specifically for lesson plans. Madeline, if you could type back to us in the chat, are you looking for lesson plans? Are you looking for science about climate change? Can you be a little, provide a little more information on that? And while we're waiting for Madeline to respond, Claire or Kristen, do you have other resources that you might be able to share with? I know you've done a lot in the PowerPoint, which will be shared via recording, and we can share the slides with everybody through our Google Drive. Maybe next week, we'll hopefully get that out to you guys. If anybody else on the webinar today have resources, I see
Yeah,
they're sharing it in the chat. Sorry, go ahead,
yeah.
Claire.
No, I was just going to say I'd be very, very interested to hear other stories and hear and see other resources. I can share some of what we've got, but again, I really, if you aren't intimately engaged with climate adaptation planning within your community or within your region, I really do recommend going to those adaptation plans and seeing where you can support and bring in, whether it's we've got the city of Windsor encourage electric vehicles, and how can we do that? I think there's just a real opportunity, is what I'm saying, to partner with folks that are doing sort of on the ground work to help promote their pieces for education as well. Chris, do you have anything to add?
No, I was just going to say that materials that we've used, we try to keep it very local. So we rely on experts within our conservation authority and within our municipal and provincial partners. I know there are great resources from a teacher perspective in terms of educational resources. I just don't have them top of mind, but Claire and I could probably put something together and share that out with participants.
Awesome. Yeah, I was at the NAAE conference last week, and I attended a number of awesome sessions. One was, I shared with you two earlier this week, was hosted by youth activists from, I believe, Arizona. And one of the things they were saying is we need to start having teachers and educators teach beyond what is climate change. Like you said, Claire, many students really understand, they get the idea that our climate is changing at a local and a global level, and we need to move beyond into what is happening in industry, in green jobs, in green sectors, so that they have a path forward, that sense of hope of where they can go beyond high school. So it's more than doom and gloom. Yes, this is happening, but what are the positive actions that are happening on the ground? And that leaves students with a sense of that they can make a difference in their own world.
And I'll
go ahead.
Can I just build on that a little bit,
Yeah.
Karen? In that, as we're looking at solutions to climate change, it's not just about those typical green jobs you think of, but it's going to be things like encouraging students to go into the trades, because one of the things we need are deep energy retrofits. So we need to retrofit all of our energy inefficient homes with better doors, windows, insulation. So we're going to be looking to the trades and need to train more students in things like building trades. So it really goes beyond what you think of as a biologist or something like that. Environmental lawyers, electric vehicle design, and renewable resource design. So, we're looking at maybe doing climate change. Some of those resources I sent from Windsor as well go into sort of climate action careers.
Yeah, I really like that. It makes me excited for my own child's future. I really resonated with you on that front. My daughter's just almost a year and a half, and there have been moments during COVID and in the last year and a bit thinking about the work that we do as environmental educators that make me panic and make me stressed out for sure. I'm going to leave the Q&A at that. If there's any other comments or questions, feel free to keep them going, and we'll see if we can get to them in an email that we send out afterwards. I'm going to share my screen now with everybody just for some what's next, what's coming up next. All right. Are folks able to see my webinar here? Okay, my slides. So, couple of things. We would like to remind you that there are two WIN awards, the Outstanding Achievement Award and the Innovation Award. The deadline for nominations is coming up in just over a week and a bit on November 2nd. Please submit somebody fabulous that you know, or a group of folks that you know. It can be a self-nomination for the Innovation Award. More information has been sent to you in the Rekindle newsletters, and if you don't have that, feel free to reach out to me directly and I'll give you some more details. Like mentioned before, there's going to be a recording of this webinar shared with you. So if you've added any more questions to the chat or the Q&A box and we haven't had a chance to answer, we'll try to respond to those or at least provide you with Claire's contact information to reach out to Claire or Chris afterwards. Don't forget, join the Facebook group and mark your calendars because we have a series of sessions coming up in November. The registration is going to open soon for that. We've got 4 events. They're happening the week of November 16th, all from about 2 p.m. to 3:30 p.m. Registration is going to be limited for some of the sessions so that the group can be a bit more, I forget the word right now, but a bit more cohesive in terms of engagement so that they have a chance to chat and interact with one, a bit more interactive, there's the word. And this Saturday, October 24th, is International Day of Climate Action. So with Claire's presentation in mind, hopefully we will see some of you to get outside in your personal life to take some climate change action, and feel free to share back with what you're doing or where you're at in the Facebook group. Love to see where you're at. And thank you everyone for taking time to join us today in your busy work schedules. Thank you to Claire Sanders for taking time to teach us and share with us what's happening in Essex region with climate change and how youth are moving towards action in their own lives and in their community. We really appreciate you taking time to be here with us today, Claire. I'd also like to thank and acknowledge the folks that have been part of this webinar preparation. Oops, pardon me. Sliding through my slides too fast there. Nikisha Mohammed, Chris Ives, Melissa Levy, or Levi, excuse me, Dan Schneider, Nina Sampson, Stana Luxford Odie, Sherry Owen, Bonnie Anderson, William Sorley, Emily February, Krista Fozzackerly, Samantha Keller, and Brenna Bartley. Thank you everyone for all of your time today. We will see you in a few weeks in November. Have a good day. If you're still on the call and you have a minute to fill in the poll, I forgot to post that poll. Feel free to take a second or two to answer some questions to let us know how you found the session today. I'm going to stay on for a little bit longer. Nikisha, if you're able to bump up that time for a little bit longer, that would be helpful. Okay, I think we can end the polling because it looks like there's 11 people on the call and 11 people have answered. So yeah, great. Okay, well, thank you everyone for being here. Have a good day.